Hello again, everybody. Great to have you along for yet another edition of Journey Through Sports and Life. My name is Scott Murray, along with the dynamic duo. Take it away,
Marjorie.
girls.
Yeah, I'm Marjorie Herrera-Lewis.
Marnie Schneider.
And a gentleman that I met over 40 years ago, a fellow by the name of Tom Grieve. And at the time, he had just wrapped up his career. He was just an incredible ball player. He came with the Texas Rangers from the Washington. Yeah, you believe this? The Washington Senators. Do you remember that team? All the way back in the 1970s. And then, of course, the Rangers this year are celebrating 50 years here in the great state of Texas. And Tom Grieve was here at the very beginning as a ball player. And then, of course, went on to become the general manager and then became the longest tenured announcer. He was a member of the announcing team of the Texas Rangers, did all their games during the course of the season. I think, would you begin in 1995, Tom?
Began in 1995,
yep.
And Scott, this will be my last year this year.
Unbelievable.
Oh, wow.
Talk about an incredible legacy that spans literally over half a century. That is above and beyond. And, of course, it all started back in 1970. He was a first-round draft pick of the Texas Rangers. And here's a little trivia for you. His son, Ben, also a first-round draft pick in Major League Baseball, the only or the first father and son team to be so honored to be first-round picks. How about that? A dad and his son, first-round picks in Major League Baseball.
Fantastic.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. Tom, welcome. Tom Grieve, our special guest and one of my favorite people in the world of sports. He's just a good guy and don't get much better than that. So great to have you on board today.
Thank you, Scott. So nice of you to say that.
Well, it's true. You're just one of the good guys in this world of sports. And we just like to talk about legacies. That's what the name of the program is, Journey Through Sports and Life. So how you got involved in baseball and how it all started. What comes to mind?
When I was a little boy, I was a huge Yankee fan. And the only thing I ever wanted to be was a baseball player. So even though it might have been a little bit naive, I was better than my neighbor. So I just figured I could be a big league ball player.
Better than your neighbor.
I have to say, from the time I was 5 until the time I was drafted, not much went through my mind other than planning on how I could make that happen. So to have been able to be a ball player was kind of like a dream come true for me.
Well, I tell you what, we've got to take a quick break here at the beginning, but then we're going to come back and hear your incredible story. Tom Grieve, the Texas Rangers, our special guest. We're back with more of Journey Through Sports and Life right after this. Well, welcome back as we continue yet another edition of Journey Through Sports and Life. Marnie and Marjorie, and I'm Scott Murray, and our special guest from the Texas Rangers. Believe it or not, over 50 years with this team. It's unbelievable, dating all the way back to 1970. Tom Grieve. And Margie, I'm going to let you start it off. Go for it.
Well, Tom, I think we found the title to your autobiography. I was better than my next door neighbor.
Well, I don't want to disparage my next door neighbor, but it really wasn't a lot of competition.
Yeah. Well, what neighborhood? Where were you? Where'd you grow up and what was that like?
I grew up in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, and it was kind of a middle-class neighborhood. I loved Mickey Mantle. I was a Yankee fan. He loved Jimmy Pearsall, who was the center fielder for the Red Sox, and go out in the street and throw each other fly balls, and whoever could catch the most of them proved that their favorite player was the best player. And fortunately, I could throw it a little bit higher and a little bit farther and catch it just a little bit better. So Mickey Mantle usually won those games.
Yeah, Mickey was the winner. Oh, that's great. Mm-hmm. Yes. So how did you, things have changed a lot since, the 50s and 60s, getting to the Rangers. And also as a child, you probably weren't going to these baseball camps and all this stuff. How did you develop your skill at that time and your love of baseball? How did it all begin?
Well, obviously it was much different back then than it is now. There were no travel teams back then. There were no pitching coaches, no hitting coaches, nothing like that. But I was very fortunate because I grew up in a neighborhood of maybe 4 streets. We all went to the same elementary school, and there must have been 15 or 16 kids within 2 or 3 years of each other. And most of them loved sports. And we didn't just love baseball. We played whatever sport was in season. We'd go up to the elementary school, which had a huge playground in the back where there was a couple of fields, one for the bigger kids, one for the little kids. And from the time it was warm enough to play, we would be playing baseball out there. Sometimes we'd play on a Saturday from 8 in the morning till it was time to go home for dinner. We'd hop the fence and knock on doors to see if we could get a drink of water. And all the people were happy to let us come in and give us a pitcher of water. So it was a wonderful way to grow up with a lot of great kids that all loved to play baseball. And most of us played Little League baseball, but our season consisted of probably, maybe 12 or 14 games. And that was it. We learned how to play on the sandlot without parents, without adults. We settled our own arguments. We made up our own rules. If not enough kids showed up, we'd have to hit to a certain field, otherwise you were out. And it never seemed to be a problem. And I think the kids today grow up in a structured environment with adults telling them what to do all the time. And I don't know that at a young age, they learn how to play the game like we did back then.
So it's really amazing, Tom, because the creativity of sports really does translate into being a better player. I think that, like, you guys creating your own little rules out there on the sandlot, I definitely think that probably made the pace of play and things more exciting. All right. So today, how would you describe what's going on in today's field with the baseball and travel ball and everything else? How does that impact the locker room, the whatever, drafting, all these things? Like, what does that really look like?
Well, there's so many opportunities that are available to kids that like to play baseball and their families. I think that parents grow up with their kids thinking, if I don't give my kids the benefit of a pitching coach, of a hitting coach, if I don't get them on a travel team to play every single weekend and play 60 or 70 games in the summer and then play again all fall, that he's not going to progress at the same level as the other kids. And while there's some reason to try to get the best coaching, I would certainly advocate that you need to get good coaching at a young age to have the proper mechanics. You can take it too far. Most people that I've talked to, including orthopedic surgeons, would say you're much better off cross-training. In other words, don't just play baseball. If you're a pitcher and all you do is this 12 months out of the year, it's going to be a very detrimental thing for your arm. But if you pitch in the summertime, play soccer in the fall, maybe you play football, maybe you play basketball, maybe you take 5 months off, whatever it is, I think that's the best way to go about it. Baseball 12 months out of the year can work for some people. I'm not a big advocate of it myself.
That's very interesting. That makes a lot of sense too. A lot of sense. Marjorie?
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm curious how you develop the skills, because, you say now, it's good to have good coaching and to get the proper mechanics and everything. But when you're little kids and you're out there playing in the yard yourself and you don't have coaches and you don't have adults there, how did you develop the kind of game that eventually got you to the major leagues?
Well, it's probably a little bit haphazard, because you're right. We didn't have coaches. All of us had a different batting stance. Some of us tried to copy our favorite player, but we had no idea of the mechanics of throwing, the mechanics of hitting, and whatever developed just happened to develop. So I guess in that regard, I was, very fortunate to have been born with the physical ability to play baseball. And the one thing I know that I had that surpassed all my friends and most other people was the desire. And if there was a game to be played, I was there to play it. If there was an adult that seemed to know what he was talking about, I listened to what he had to say. But it probably wasn't until I got to high school where I had a coach that was a brilliant baseball person that loved the game and had a passion for it as much or more than I did. And so whatever I learned before I was drafted and went into professional baseball, I probably learned from him.
Oh, Tom, when did you start to realize that this could be a career for you? Like, at what age were you like, you know what, maybe this actually can be a real job?
I could be the next Mickey Mantle, is what she's saying.
That's right.
$10.2 million.
Yeah, right.
It started when I was really young, and it was unrealistic and naive. I just said to myself, if I'm the best player in my neighborhood, then why can't I be a big league player? Now,
well, if you had 16 kids, that's a pretty good, number of kids.
Now, that wasn't very realistic. So it wasn't really until I was a sophomore in high school. And we were playing a game against a really good team from a neighboring city who had a tremendous player. And all the scouts came to watch him play. I was probably 14 or 15. And in this game, I hit a long home run to left field. And in the newspaper the next day, they said, all the scouts came to see Kevin Collins, but they walked away talking about Tom Grieve. And so, then that occurred to me, well, if they were there to see a player who was going to be drafted into professional baseball, and they walked away talking about me, then maybe they think the same way about me. So that might have been when it first entered my mind that there might be a possibility.
And did you ever, after you got to the majors, Tom, and here you are, you're a Major League Baseball player, and then of course is as I said before, you become the general manager of the Texas Rangers. You're very involved in all facets of the game. Where did you think to yourself that your son Ben had a chance to follow in your footsteps and actually be a major leaguer? That just doesn't happen. And as I said at the top, for Pete's sake, you're the first father and son team to both be first round picks. That's almost unheard of.
It's unusual. I think more and more, no matter what the sport is, you start to see sons of professional players become professionals in whatever sport it is. And it kind of makes sense because that's what their dad does. That's what they watch. Right. That's what he teaches them. If your mom or dad was a school teacher, you probably have a better chance to become a school teacher than the rest of us. If your dad's a doctor, whatever it might be. So, in that regard, it was probably natural for Ben to want to play. But along with wanting to play, you have to have the physical skills to be able to do it. I always thought he was really good, but I also was realistic enough to know that the worst judge of a little boy's talent is his parent, because you're just not objective. You're subjective. You want him to do well. It's what he loves. Therefore, we all think our son is a little bit better than he really is. And so it was probably when he was maybe 9 years old, Tom House had a baseball camp out in San Diego, the San Diego School of Baseball. And both my boys went on a plane by themselves and stayed with Tom out there and went to this camp. And when Ben came back from this camp, he had a different batting stance. And I was throwing him some balls and I said, did you pick that stance up out in San Diego? And he said, yes. But before you say anything, Tony Gwynn was my batting instructor.
Oh.
So I said, very well.
Say no more.
Exactly.
Say no more. I'll tell you what, hold the thought of what's coming up. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to be back with more with our special guest, Tom Grieve, here on our special show here, Journey Through Sports and Life. Don't go away. Welcome back, and we're still chuckling to ourselves about Tom's last comment about Tony Gwynn being the guy that was teaching him how to maybe hit a baseball. And go ahead and pick the story up, Tom. That was great.
Well, when I was pitching to Ben, and he said that about Tony Gwynn, I could tell with the tone of voice and the way he said it that he's thinking in his mind, I used to think you were the smartest baseball person in the world, and whatever you said, I would do. But now I think I've graduated to a little bit higher league, and I'm going to start listening to what Tony Gwynn said. And believe me, I'm all for that. But to get back to your original question, after that camp, Tom called me and he said, your son's really gifted. One of the guys here, Reggie Waller, who was working with him, said, I'd like to bet in 10 years that he'll be a number one draft choice. And, so I kept that in the back of my mind that maybe he was as good as I thought he was. But I also know that so many things can happen between the time you're 8 years old and the time you're 18 years old. So I didn't put a lot of stock in that.
Did you ever think that he might be a member of the Rangers someday and draft your own son?
Well, I thought of that as a general manager. And I always said to myself, Sandy Johnson was our scouting director. And I always said to him, that's not my job to do the scouting and to do the selecting in the draft, but it's my opinion that the worst thing that could happen to Ben would be to be drafted by the Rangers and come into pro ball with his father as the general manager. It just sets up a situation where kids on the team might not want to go out and have a beer. They might not want to tell a story. When he gets promoted to another team, it's because his dad was the GM. There's just so much involved in that my thought was it might be better for him to play somewhere else. Now, it got to the point where he was good enough going into the draft to where maybe the fact that he could really help the organization and be important kind of outweighed that. But it turned out that the Rangers were picking somewhere, I don't remember what the number was, 10th or 12th or 14th, and he was picked much earlier than that. So it never became a think about.
No, totally
you
understand.
mentioned a good point there, though, about, because of the dad and all that. So was there ever any, how often, I guess, did the two of you go out and just take out your mitts and play in the yard, and kids maybe from his schools come join in? And, what was that like? Was there anything like that going on where people knew that you were a major leaguer and they were going to come over and hang out and play some ball?
A little bit of that went on, but as far as, both boys, my son Tim was 5 years older than Ben, but I would say we played catch. I pitched to them every single chance that we got. So if I was home, it was every single day. But we also did other things. We also played basketball. We had a basketball hoop, and in the football season, when I was coming home from work, almost every day I got home at 5:30 or 5:45. Ben was sitting on the curb in front of our house. Now he would have been
I love that.
12, and he had a football. And as soon as I got out of the car, he'd throw me the football. If I went to my older son's game, he brought 2 gloves and a ball. And while the game was going on, we played catch. So I always say that if you hope that your child does something in life, whatever it is, also hope that it's what he loves to do the most. And in this case, I never felt like I was pushing the boys to do this. Maybe I was a little bit, but I never had the feeling that they didn't love doing it every second. And if it was their choice, that's what they would have chosen to do themselves.
You had some of you of course had the knowledge about, like you said, mechanics and you mentioned orthopedics, not the wear and tear and all. When I was about 10 years old, my father, he had pitched in college. And so he taught me how to catch his fastball. And I was begging him to teach me his curveball, but he wouldn't, because he said it was too dangerous at that age for me to be throwing a curveball, things like that I could end up hurting myself. You probably had a lot of that knowledge, that you knew what was appropriate for what age, and your sons had the benefit of knowing when it was time to throw certain pitches and how old they had to be, and that kind of thing.
Absolutely. And when we would play catch when I was young, between the ages of 8 and 13, everyone in the neighborhood had a good curveball, because we threw them and we learned how to throw them. But even if you go back to those years, 60 years ago, we still knew somehow from our parents, from our coaches, that throwing curveballs wasn't something that a 10 or 12-year-old should do. So we'd throw them in the neighborhood, but we never used them in a game. They only threw fastballs. Wow. If you fast forward to today's game, I coached my grandson's Little League team with my daughter. My daughter's the president of the University Little League, and we coached a team together. Wow. And then I coached the district team. And I go to all their club games. Once you get to a higher level of 9 to 13 years old, kids are throwing curveballs every single pitcher, every single game. Some of them are throwing too many of them. And along the way, it's probably going to be detrimental. But I happen to have the benefit of knowing Tom House, who's one of the most respected baseball pitching coaches. In fact, he coaches 27 NFL quarterbacks, including Tom Brady and Drew Brees, on pitching mechanics. And he showed my grandson how to throw a curveball that doesn't take the stress on your arm. So instead of holding it with 2 fingers and pressing down on your middle finger and snapping it off like that, he suggests that you hold it with all 4 fingers and throw it more like a football. So you don't get that action and you get more of an action like this. And he actually says, if you do it properly, it puts less stress on your arm than a fastball. So my grandson does throw a curveball, but that's the way he throws it. And I don't think it puts as much stress on his arm. But that is definitely an issue in youth sports, because the bigger kids can dominate kids who just throw fastballs. They don't have a chance. It's like batting practice. And the kids know that, and they want to compete and they want to win. And so they know if they can throw a good curveball, that's the equalizer. And so you go into these games and the coaches want to win, the kids want to do well, and probably a lot of them are throwing more curveballs than they should.
Yeah, see, like you say, Tom House has this other way of doing it. Not every coach out there knows what Tom House knows.
No, they don't.
So that's
and it's so much of it comes down to coaching. And again, like giving kids the opportunity to have good coaches, and also obviously being a parent who wants to show their children some things. And I think that what you were saying is that just doing anything to be involved in your kid's life, whether it's, really actually training them up to be a professional athlete or just being involved and invested, makes such a huge difference in their life plans.
Absolutely. And the best thing a parent can do for their child, and I've seen both sides of this, and I'm sure all of you have too, is whatever it is that they're doing, go to the event, don't overly critique it, be supportive, tell them how much you love them, and when it's over, tell them how proud you were. Mm-hmm. Because so many times you see Little League parents screaming from the stand at their child.
Makes
you
no
see
sense.
The child almost cower out in the field. You see him come to the plate, and while he's looking at the pitcher, he glances over at his father to see if everything's okay. Mm-hmm. And if that's the environment your child grows up in, it doesn't matter what he's doing. It might be a school play. It might be a spelling bee. It could be anything. That kind of attitude just shows that the kid is doing what he's doing for the gratification of the parent. And nothing could be worse from the kid than that. You just have to love.
That's painful to see.
And if he doesn't want to play, don't make him play.
Mm-hmm. Tom, you're spot on. Oh my gosh, you're spot on. Father of the year right here, folks. Oh, that's great. I totally agree with you. Totally agree. That's great. Go ahead, Marnie.
So, okay. If I grew up and I was very fortunate as a young girl to get to go to a lot of baseball games, because at the time, the Eagles and the Phillies shared the same baseball stadium. So that was really cool. And in the dog days of summer, when there was no football, there was baseball going on. And the Phillies would give me a hot dog and let me go watch Mike Schmidt, hit some home runs. But how would you tell somebody, when people say, oh, I don't like baseball, or how can we, I love baseball. I think it's such a great sport. So from an expert like you, how would you encourage somebody to start to like baseball? Like, what are the baby steps to like baseball?
Well, all the sports are so different. I don't know that there's a plan to make someone like baseball. My guess is that when you went to a game, when people that love baseball go to a game, they love about baseball that you can go sit in the stands and have a conversation, drink a beer, drink a Coke, eat a hot dog. There's time between pitches. They like the pace of the game. They're not worried whether the game is 2 hours and 40 minutes or 2 hours and 45 minutes, because it's a comfortable, relaxed environment. Now, it can get exciting, don't get me wrong, but it's so much different than basketball. Nowadays, when I go to a basketball game, first of all, I have to bring earplugs because I'm fearful of what it's going to do to my hearing. And it's just nonstop noise and commercials and loud music and smoke, that there's never time where you can just take a deep breath and talk to the person that you came to the game with. That's what I love about baseball. I think you love baseball if you go to a game And as you said, you have a couple of favorite players. If you grew up watching the Rangers, you might have liked Pudge Rodriguez or Michael Young or Ian Kinsler. And that's the reason you go to the game. You love the game, but you can't wait to see if Michael Young's going to get a hit. So, maybe collecting baseball cards is a way to start to love the players. Maybe watching it on TV. Maybe listening to it on the radio when you're driving in the car. It might not be the kind of thing that you can say, this is why you should love baseball. This is how you do it. And the next day they love baseball. Might be a process that takes some time. And baseball's not for everybody.
Well, it's still a good game. America's pastime, as they call it, huh? Tom Grieve is our special guest. Excuse me. Tom Grieve, our special guest from the Texas Rangers, was a member of the team over half a century ago. Was a player, was a general manager, went on to be a broadcaster, former #1 draft pick. He's back with more as we continue on this edition of Journey Through Sports and Life. Welcome back as we continue on with our special guest, Tom Grieve of the Texas Rangers. And as we said, he's done it all from broadcaster to player to you name it. Margie, take it away.
Well, I'm curious. So Tom, you've told us that you grew up wanting to be a baseball player, but you eventually became a general manager and then a broadcaster. I haven't heard anything about that being a goal when you were growing up. So which one would you say was most difficult, and how did you transition into these different positions with the Rangers?
I never ever anticipated what I would do after I got done playing, but I wanted to be a player. I planned to be a player. My they say you become what you think about all day long. Well, if that in fact is true, then that's why I became a baseball player, because that's all I thought about all day long. And so subconsciously, subtly, maybe that made me practice a little harder. Maybe that made me seek out better advice and better coaching. Whatever the reason, I became a player. Now, I went to a couple of years of college. I was a math major. I assumed that however long my playing career lasted, that I would probably go back to Massachusetts where I grew up, finish my education, and maybe teach or coach. That was in the back of my mind. But the longer I played, the more baseball is what I loved, the more it was apparent that my friends were involved in baseball. And so we moved to Texas the last couple of years that I played, and I just kind of fell into front office work. Eddie Robinson was the general manager, and he had scouted me when I was in high school, actually. And he said to me, I think you have a career ahead of you in the front office. Is that something you'd want to do? Now, I was still a player. I said, I never thought of it, but if you think that's possible, then yeah. And so my career was over. He hired me. I worked in group ticket sales to begin with. And then things kind of happened quickly. I went into the farm department, the scouting department. I was a general manager. And when I was a player, it ran its course. And when my career was over, I knew it. I was ready to do something else. I didn't miss playing. I missed the camaraderie in the clubhouse and that kind of thing, but I didn't miss playing. And when I got a chance to work in the front office, it was something new. I put playing behind me. I did whatever I could do to get better at it. But I never planned on it. It would just kind of fell in my lap. And when I got fired,
that's pretty lucky.
Yeah, no, really. And when I got fired as a general manager, George Bush was one of our managing general partners, Rusty Rose and Tom Schieffer.
Yeah.
They told me that I wasn't going to be the general manager anymore, but immediately said, but we want you to stay in the organization. What is it that you think you'd like to do? And I said, well, if you want me to do that, I'll think about it. But it's been my history that a baseball position would not make any sense. You've hired new people with new ideas. The last thing they want is the old guy hanging around, slowing up the process. And I don't even know how broadcasting came up, but someone mentioned it. And I said, yeah, I might want to try that. And Tom Schieffer said, well, we have to pay you for another year, so why don't you give it a try and see how you like it? And that was 28 years ago. And the remarkable thing to me is I was a player for 13 years. I worked in the front office for 15 years, 28 years. This is my 28th year broadcasting.
Wow.
So I've been a broadcaster as long as I did everything else. And believe me, broadcasting was as far away from what I thought I'd be doing as being an astronaut was. It just kind of happened. So, sometimes you need a break, and then it's up to you to see if you can make the best out of it.
So which one has been more challenging? You grow up loving baseball, you end up in the front office, you end up in the booth, but which one?
I think being a general manager was more challenging. Now, realistically, being a player is harder than being a general manager. Mm-hmm. But given the physical ability to do it, it's difficult. You face good pitching. You're trying to stay in the big league. It's not easy. But for me personally, I had no background in management. I'd never hired anybody. I'd never fired anybody. I'd never negotiated a contract. I'd never discussed a person's salary, had a performance review. I'd never done any of that. Mike Stone was the president of our team. And when he told me he wanted me to be the general manager, I told him I didn't think I was ready for it. I was just barely in the process of learning how to be a farm director. And I came up with 2 or 3 names that I thought would make better general managers than me. And
you did?
Yeah. And he basically said to me, look, I have confidence that you can do this. Mm-hmm. Your fears are not well-founded because you're bright, and you'll learn about this on the job. It'll be on the job training. And it was, and I became more comfortable with it, but I don't think there was ever a time where I really felt like I had the background to do the things that a general manager has to do. Certainly in today's game, I would be far removed from being a general manager. Most of the kids took management courses. A lot of them are lawyers. They all know analytics. It's changed so much. So that's, how I became a general manager. That's the most challenging thing. The easiest thing has been being a broadcaster. And it goes back to the first game I broadcast. The great Mark Holtz was my partner.
Oh, yeah.
He saw me writing down all my notes and looking at all the papers. And he walked into the broadcast room and he said, Tom, put all that stuff away. Don't look down at your desk and see what you've written, see what you've studied. Yep. That's what I do. All you have to do is look down on the field. And when you feel like talking about what you see, go ahead and talk about it. Well, I've been doing that for 28 years anyway. And for 28 years, that's pretty much what I've tried to do. And it goes back to Mark Holt. So I look at it.
Great advice. Great advice.
If I was in baseball for 28 years and I couldn't watch a game and talk about it and hopefully explain it in a way that the average fan could understand it, then I wasted 28 years. And fortunately, I felt like I could do that. And so the last 28 years has been incredibly enjoyable. I never anticipated doing it. But to be very honest, I've never felt that it took any effort at all personally.
Well, I've been listening to you for years, and it just is so natural. And to think that you weren't trained for that, you just kind of moved into it. It just seems very natural and a perfect fit.
Yeah, what Mark told him though was he was spot on. Yeah, Mark's advice: just do your thing and be Tom Grieve. Right. That was the best advice he could have given you.
Yeah, and I've probably said 100 times over the years, I've never felt like a professional broadcaster. It's never entered my mind that I was a professional broadcaster. I just feel like I'm a ball player who's been in baseball and is doing his best to explain the game. That's all I've ever felt like.
Well, you kind of sound like my dear friend's father, Joe Gargiola. He played baseball.
Well, I'd like to have had the stories he did in his personality, but I always had the feeling he was probably doing the exact same thing I just described.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
That's hilarious.
Like you had the confidence from way back to be able to jump into different positions. So on a level of giving people confidence, I think that's something that clearly helped you in your career. And so what do you think you would tell somebody, a young person, to have some confidence to go out and follow their dreams?
I would tell a young person, and I wish I followed this myself. I would tell a young person, regardless of what field you're going into, is become adept and comfortable speaking in front of other people, speaking in front of groups. I would encourage taking speech classes. I would encourage being on the debate team, because if you can communicate comfortably, it serves you well in whatever you do. When I got to be a general manager, I was petrified to get up and speak in front of a group. Actually, a couple of years before that, when I was working in the farm department or group ticket sales, Bobby Bragan was our PR director, not a PR director, but kind of promoted the team. And he would speak, and Scott, you probably heard him 100 times at luncheons around the Metroplex, and he would take me every time. And I knew it was going to happen. My palms would sweat, my heart would pound, and he'd say, I brought a special guest for you. Tom Grieve hit the longest home run in the history of Arlington, Texas, and he's going to talk to you for 5 minutes. And I go, oh, God. But after doing that for months and months, I finally became somewhat comfortable. And then, you'd have to talk in front of the team. You'd have to talk at banquets. And by the time I became a broadcaster, I was somewhat comfortable talking like we're talking now. But had I grown up and not be petrified of show and tell in front of my friends because I was going to say something wrong, and being comfortable back then, even if I didn't become a baseball player, whatever it was, a salesperson, a marketing person, whatever it was, if you can talk and you can communicate, you can succeed.
Tell you what, as I think back of all that you've shared with Marjorie and Marnie and I, Tom, you said as a kid growing up in Massachusetts, oh gosh, I just love to play baseball. And then you realize that, gosh, maybe I could do this as a living. This could be my profession. Holy cow. And you're a teenager and you're just in, and now you look where you are and all that you've continued to do. I just wondered, what do you look upon your legacy as? You were in one thing I didn't mention yet that I was saving to the end, you're in the Texas Rangers Hall of Fame, for Pete's sake. What, 10, 12 years ago, you got inducted into that. I mean, everything that you could possibly achieve. And as I said at the top, and I mean this with all sincerity, you're just one of the really nice guys in the world of sports, not just what you did on the field, but who you are off the field. So I just wondered if you had a chance right now to share with all three of us, what it is that you would like your legacy someday to be. You've been a player, you've been a general manager, you've been a broadcaster, you've done just about everything possible in the world of sports. What would you like your legacy to be? Somebody looks, oh, Tom Grieve, 20, 30, 40 years from now, what would it be?
Well, I'm going to try to describe what I would want that to be. I think, first of all, if someone said to me, what in your life are you most proud of? I would say my family. So I guess the first thing I would say, if someone was to describe my legacy, I hope they would say that he was an excellent husband and a wonderful father. That would come first.
Awesome.
After that, I would hope that people said he was an honorable person. I would hope that people that knew that I played baseball knew that I prepared myself as well as I could. I played as hard as I could, and I never left anything on the field. I hope they would have seen me as that kind of a player. After that, I don't know what they would say about my front office tenure, my general manager's tenure. Hopefully that the team was much better when I left than it was when I got there. But as far as broadcasting goes, I've pretended my audience over the years was the players, because they go back into the clubhouse and watch the game on the TV. And I have to have credibility with them. When the team's on the road, my audience is their wives, because you have to be very careful what you say, because it's going to get relayed back to the husband. So you have to have clarity with what you say. And the other group is 70 to 75-year-old women. And I always felt that if I can broadcast a game and a 75-year-old woman can watch that game, now there might be some that know baseball inside and out. Most of them, 75-year-old men for that matter, don't. But if they can say, I love listening to him because he explains the game in a way that I can understand it, then I would look back and say, I was successful as a player. I hope my teammates thought I was a great teammate, and I was successful as a broadcaster. So that's probably a little bit longer answer than you wanted, but that's the way I would describe it.
No, it's a great answer. And again, I don't mean to sound, yeah, it really was. I'm sure both Marnie and Marjorie agree, but that's what I assumed you would say, is something like that. And the first thing you said was your family, and that's where it starts. And that's because that's why you're the man that you are, not just as a great baseball guy, but as a great human being. So I tell you, that's great stuff. So I thought it was super, Tom. and I'm sure our audience would quickly agree. We're going to take one final break, and we're going to be back with the man himself, Texas Rangers Hall of Famer. We're talking about Tom Grieve as we continue on this edition of Journey Through Sports and Life. Welcome back as we head down the home stretch with the man himself. We're talking about Tom Grieve, former player, general manager, and broadcaster of the Texas Rangers. Tom, you've been just great today. We can't thank you enough. Marnie, I know you've got a couple of questions, or at least one question before we wrap it up.
Tom, you've had so many incredible experiences. Is there one where you're like, wait a minute, I get to actually do this?
I think the first one I would say is I grew up wanting to be a baseball player. I loved the Yankees. I knew all their batting averages. And my first major league game, when I got called up from the Senators, was a doubleheader at Yankee Stadium. And I played in the first game, and I went up to bat. And when I'm standing there, I heard the public address announcer go, "Now batting for the Washington Senators, number 3, Tom Grieve." And I went back and remembered the first major league game I ever saw. That same public address announcer said, "Now batting for the New York Yankees, number 7, Mickey Mantle."
Wow.
Just having that happen made me feel like a big league player.
Oh my gosh, what a
For
thrill.
sure. Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
so you mentioned Mickey Mantle at the beginning. And so I met him once and got to interview him, and we were driving a golf cart, and it was such a thrill. And so, but I didn't grow up pretending to be Mickey Mantle when I was playing against my neighbors. So what was it like when you first met him? Tell us about that.
Well, I first met him at a golf tournament. Billy Martin was our manager. Billy Martin was Mickey Mantle's best friend, and he had a golf tournament. Mickey played in the golf tournament. And after the tournament, everybody was in the clubhouse eating and having a beer. And I had plenty of opportunities to go up and introduce myself and talk to him. I was so petrified that I couldn't bring it upon myself to do that. But I got close enough to where I didn't meet him, but I heard him talking. And that at the time was good enough for me.
That's great. Well, that's a great way to wrap it up, because I've got to say, Mickey Mantle, number 7, that's the number I wore throughout Little League. So I'm right there with you, Tom. He was my guy, and I did meet him because he lived in Dallas. I did meet him, and the family actually asked me to come to the funeral. I sat next to Joe Pepitone and Reggie Jackson, and my wife and I. Yeah, one of the highlights of my life. So Mickey Mantle was my guy. So I'm right with you, Tom. You have been outstanding. I can't thank you enough, my friend. You've just been great. Congratulations on your incredible career. And Marnie and Marjorie and I really appreciate your time here on our program.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks. Yep,
Tom.
just great. Thanks, great. Tom Grieve, our special guest, one of the great guys in the world of sports and certainly in Major League Baseball. So until next time on this edition of, are you ready? Journey Through Sports and Life. I'm Scott Murray. Girls?
Marjorie Herrera-Lewis.
Marnie Schneider.
All right. Fantastic. Till next time, stay safe and stay well, everybody.